If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What is the scariest true story that happened in your life that still haunts you to this day?
I run a midnight delivery route in central Ohio, dropping off products at various gas stations and grocery stores. One of the routes takes us down to the southeast portion of the state. Going from one of our stops to another, you can take a short cut over the hills and countryside and cut off about 40 minutes versus a normal highway route, so I often take it. This night there was a torrential downpour and sheets of rain. I had my windshield wipers on the highest setting and dropped my speed so I could traverse the winding road safely. The road, like I said, winds up and over hills and countryside, and often there aren't any houses for miles, just dark country roads. I'm halfway through the trip, carefully driving, when I make out a figure along the side of the road at some kind of cattle-style gate blocking off a dirt road. He has a flashlight and a long, dark-colored raincoat. As I round the turn and slow down just in case there are other people with him/her, they turn and point the flashlight directly at my face, through the windshield. The person holds it there as I roll down the road. I'm a little annoyed right now, the light is blinding me, so I slow down a bit more. Still, the flashlight is trained on my face, and as I finally get almost parallel to them, he turns the beam away from me and waves it up the hillside. I glanced up, and suddenly there are dozens of lights, all bobbing and weaving in the wooded area. All pointing towards me and the truck. The rain was intense and still coming down. The guy at the roadside gate turns the light back toward me. I pushed the accelerator down and sped up and got out of there. I could see the lights on the hillside in my side mirror. I didn't slow down until I got to my next stop. I don't take that shortcut anymore. Around 7 years ago, I was standing in the hallway of my home when I could hear my 3-year-old son chatting to someone in our living room. I went in, and he's facing the back wall and still talking. I ask him who he's talking to, and he replies, bearing in mind he's only a toddler, the man up in the sky. There were no pictures on the wall, and he was looking upwards at the time. Kinda laughed it off and told the missus we were living in a haunted house. 3 years ago, I arrived home for lunch to find my mother and my youngest boy sitting on the top of my stairs. The youngest is squealing and crying, and my missus shouts at me that he said there's a man in the living room. My oldest boy is now 6 at this stage, and my youngest boy is 3. I go into the living room and no one is there, windows are locked, and everything appears normal. I take my youngest boy by the hand and ask him where the man is. He points to the same part of the wall that the oldest boy is chatting at. I asked him what the man said, and he said, the youngest boy's speech is a little better than his brother's was at the same age. The man wanted to take me up to the sky. Right at the same time, there was an overwhelming smell of rotten cigarette smoke that I'll never forget. It freaked me and the missus out. The smell must have lasted for an hour or so. She told her parents, and they convinced us to let a priest bless the house. 6 years ago, I snuck into an abandoned tuberculosis hospital, not Waverly Hills, with a friend. My friend had a voice recorder with her, and I had a cheap video camera. Once we had gotten inside via the basement, we both hit record at the same time. This nugget of information is important. As we made our way up floor by floor, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being followed, but upon checking behind me, there was nothing. We continued on, and nothing really creepy happened at the time other than that feeling of being followed. A few days later, a friend of mine that had gone with us but didn't go inside asked if I watched the video. I said I didn't, but she and I could check it out. I put the SD card in my computer and began to watch the video. The video itself is pretty dark, and you can't see anything other than my flashlight beam bouncing off walls. When it got to the part where we had reached the second floor, I caught something on that camera that I will never forget. In the video, my friend asked, if you are trapped here and want to leave, please speak into this little read light. Not a second passed before there was a response, ain't no light. I turned and looked at my friend wide-eyed, and she looked pale. I knew we had both heard the same thing. I immediately called my other friend who went with me inside and asked her to meet me. When I met her and played the clip back, she immediately went pale herself. She dug her voice recorder out and listened to the same section on it, matching it up with my camera. There was no voice. It was only her and me in the building, and this voice in my video was neither of ours. It was a gruff male voice, and as clear as it was like a person spoke directly into my camera's mic loudly. I was right, there was someone following us. These stories still stick with me. I grew up in a house on Long Island in the town of Brentwood. It was a quiet town for its location. My dad worked as a taxi driver at the time, which meant he would usually end up coming home early in the morning and I would greet him. So it's Saturday, I'm watching cartoons, and my dad comes in and I run to say hello. My mom hears us from the bedroom and says, "Hello honey, don't go in the pool, it's not ready yet." Me and my dad think, well, that's weird, it's 6 a.m., we weren't going to go in the pool, but just brush it off, and he goes on to tell me his usual stories of the crazies he picked up throughout the night. We then realized it was Saturday and my mom was at work, and it was only me and him in the house. The voice sounded just like my mother. Fast forward a couple of weeks, we had just moved into the house, and my new neighbors come over to welcome us to town. It was the two mothers, two sons, one my age, one a little older in 10th grade, and two little girls, one blonde-haired girl and a shy brunette that didn't talk. We get to playing some soccer, however, the little brunette girl is nowhere to be found. The curious little kid I was ran around the property, and I found her playing in the woods, a dangerous area for little nooblets to be exploring. She asks me to come play tag, but I decline, wanting to get everyone in on the game. The reactions of everyone as I asked for them to join us were puzzling, along with the response from the mom, "We only have one daughter." It turns out a small brown-haired girl drowned in the pool 10 years ago. The mother soon passed from a heart attack. The following 5 to 6 years were terrifying for everyone. I rarely came home to an empty house when I was growing up. It was me, my parents, and my older sister most times, or one of my other siblings living there temporarily between leases. We also had dogs. So one way or another, it was rare to be totally alone. One afternoon, I'd say I was about 15, I came home from school to just that, complete solitude. I can't remember why, but my mother had the dogs, my dad was away for work, and my sister was off doing whatever the hell she did. Intending to enjoy the rare solitude, I plopped myself down in my dad's easy chair and got on the phone. The way the den was set up in our house put the door to the kitchen directly behind the chair, which was at an angle facing the opposite corner of the room, where the TV was. At the time I hadn't turned it on, so the screen was reflecting the kitchen behind me. The kitchen had a sliding glass door/window that spanned the entire back wall of the room, along with a big, long curtain. The door was closed, and the bar was down to lock it. As I was sitting there talking to whatever friend I'd called, I saw a large, dark shape reflected in the TV as it moved across the kitchen door, blocking out the overhead light in the ceiling as it passed. It only lasted a second, and I completely froze. I tried to think of what it could have been, but nothing should have been able to do that. The door to the den was still wide open. The curtains couldn't have reached 8 feet across the room even if the door had been revealed, allowing for a breeze. There wasn't even a dog in the house, not that one of them could have made that shadow. To this day, I have no idea what it was. I was scared out of my mind and spent the rest of the time alone outside on our front porch. I've thought of every possible explanation, and nothing makes sense. It didn't look like a person walked across the doorway, it didn't move like one, but it was the right height and width. I have no idea what it was. I was walking in the woods once when I saw a blue tent, or what had once been a tent. It was torn to shreds, the poles were snapped, and it was all in a messy pile in the middle of a clearing. From a distance, it had looked like this clearing was full of cream-colored flowers, but as I got closer, I realized they were pieces of paper. Pages from Stephen King's The Shining, to be precise. They were charred around the outside as though someone had set light to them, and the fact that they were individuals made it look like someone had really wanted to destroy the book. I shrugged it off. It was a very neat setup for whatever project the film students from the nearby school would be making, I told myself. Very well done, guys. Very creepy. It made the news shortly afterwards that a man from the next town over who had been missing for a long time had finally turned up. Dead. He was resting in his blue tent in the woods. I don't know if he was still in there when I walked past. I don't want to know. I used to live in community housing that was converted into crisis accommodation for at-risk youths, myself included. The apartment complex was home to drug deals, punched holes in the walls, cop visits, you name it. A constant blur of blue and red lights. I was 16, petite, and female. It didn't occur to me to change the locks in the event a previous resident copied the key. One night I was cramming chemistry in my bedroom to complete my online high school degree when the landline rang. I pick up, and there's silence. I keep asking who's there, but I only hear breathing. They hang up. Shortly after, there's commotion outside my window. Loud noises in the bushes, something brushing up against my apartment. I muster up the courage to pull back the blinds. And I can't see anything. As in, I genuinely can't even see the fence or the yard, it's just too dark outside. The streetlights have gone out. Close to midnight, I'm about to leave my bedroom to visit the bathroom before going to sleep. Then I realize something sounds different. Light footsteps. Right outside my door. While I lived alone, I always closed any door behind me and locked it from force of habit, since my parents had drug/alcohol issues. So when my doorknob began to turn of its own accord, the bedroom door was locked. Whoever was standing in my living room couldn't get in. They tried for an hour. I just lay in bed motionless. They didn't bang the door, say anything, or try and force their way in. They just twisted the knob back and forth, rattling the door back and forth, with this insane, flat, driven persistence. That was somehow more alarming. I had the landline in my bedroom, so in retrospect, the obvious thing to do would have been to call the police. I guess I didn't because it all just seemed normal. I was living in a bizarre place and came from a bizarre background. I was terrified, but it also seemed, well, perfectly natural. They stopped after an hour, and I eventually fell asleep. In the morning, I left my bedroom to check what had been stolen. Nothing. Television and appliances were present, nothing had been damaged. I couldn't tell if items had been moved, but nothing was missing. To this day, I don't know what their motives were or who they were. I do know I'm very lucky that when they copied the front door key, they forgot to copy the bedroom key. When I was about 6 or 7, I was in a convenience store with my mother, and this guy came into the store that was really friendly with everyone. Keep in mind this was the 80s. As he walked in, he made sure to touch as many people as he could. When he first walked into the store, his eyes were a normal brown until the sunlight touched his face. His eyes turned yellow with a slit like a cat. I thought maybe it was just the light, but they did not turn back brown, and he continued to touch people. I suddenly had the urge to scream or vomit. When I saw him reach out to touch my mom, I just started screaming. I remember yelling at my mom to not let him touch her. He paused and then continued to try and touch her anyway. I started hucking those little cans of bean dip at his head to make him back off. That made my mom step out of his reach. I remember sobbing and telling her, there is something wrong with her eyes. Don't let him touch you. He tried to touch her again, and one of the other customers in the store told him to stop trying to touch her mother, you were upsetting her child. He stared at me for a moment and disappeared down one of the aisles. As my mom apologized to the store owner, the lady told her she was not upset and that kids sometimes see things we cannot. She had my older sister, who was 16, and was also freaked out by taking me in the car ahead of her. As we were driving out of the parking lot, he started running after our car. My sister and I began yelling at her to keep straight and not turn toward the apartments we lived in. The store was next to where we lived. I'm glad she listened. I just felt like something bad was going to happen to us if he found out where we lived. My mom actually went back to that store a few weeks later and had to drag me in. She refused to let go of her hand. The store owner saw how terrified I was of coming into her store and let me know that he was not there today. My mom tried to tell her I had a nightmare. I replied, how can I have a nightmare when I'm awake? The store owner told my mom she should listen to me because they brought their granddaughter, who was around my age, and she reacted the same way to this guy. I went behind the counter, and she curled into a ball in the corner with tears in her eyes. She said that she could see him too and see his eyes. I asked the store owner, why can they not see him? She told me that she and the other adults were too old. She told my mom that as people get older they lose the ability to see and that she should listen. After that, we never went back to that store and eventually moved. This was roughly about 3 years ago. Now to preface this story, I am not a believer in the supernatural / occult / magic / etc. My best friend, however, does. This is not fake, I did not make this up. Where I grew up, there's a road called Indian Cabin Road. It's a long road that intersects several other roads, eventually going from pavement to dirt after a bit. You eventually end up near a river in another town, but for a while you drive through the woods with no guidance except for the dirt road since no phones get a signal out there. Now, being from a small town, every kid knows about it. It's almost a rite of passage. I 100% know that if I were to walk up to any local at a Wawa and ask about Indian Cabin Road, they'd immediately say, yeah, that place is haunted and leave it at that. So anyway, my best friend and I decided to find it and drive down there the night of Halloween. After searching our maps and finding the street it forked off of, we drove down in her Caprice, thinking all the while, why the duck did we choose the worst car in the world to go off-roading? She's a firm believer in the supernatural, so the whole time she's playing up the fact that it's Halloween and we're driving down the most haunted road in our town. I'm rolling my eyes, trying not to laugh, because duck it is Halloween, and I might as well enjoy the supposed spookiness of it all. We end up driving most of it without realizing it until we reach the part where the road is essentially a dirt pathway. Not even 10 minutes later, my friend inexplicably stops her car and says that she doesn't want to drive down anymore because her car can't handle it. Before I can even reply, I hear her say horse opera, what the duck is that in the most chilling, terrified voice I have ever heard in my life. In the tree line, there's what only I can describe as this spinal, skeleton thing staring at us with glowing red eyes. It was on all fours, but its body was stretched out so that its back legs were bigger than its front. It was pitch black outside at this point, but both her high beams and headlights were on, so I am 100% certain it was not a human in a morph suit or an animal or anything in between. It stared, this inky Bayak creature, and started to move towards us. Now in high stress situations, I usually end up laughing to calm my fears, and at this point I started chuckling, telling her it was just a wolf, that's nothing to be afraid of. My friend immediately booked it out there, repeatedly asking me what it was and what was happening. All I kept saying, all I could really say was, it's just a wolf. It's just a wolf. I was legitimately scared, and to this day I have no idea what the duck we saw. We haven't driven down there since, and my friend repeatedly brings it up whenever I mention I don't believe in the supernatural. One day while doing my laundry, one of the lights blew out in my basement. My basement is set up so that the laundry room is split from the other side of the basement with a wall and a door. In order to get upstairs, you have to exit the laundry room and go through the other part of the basement. So the light blew in the other part, not the laundry room. As it was the only light on that side, it was pretty ducking dark. I finished the laundry I had to do while dreading the walk through the dark basement. I exit the laundry room, get halfway through the basement, and I hear a loud cackle. Imagine a sound people make when they imitate a witch. Take that and imagine that the witch had been smoking for 50 years, making her voice deeper and hoarser. That is what I heard, clear as day, right behind me. I did not hesitate to bolt for the stairs. I waited until my father got home and then changed the bulb. I have yet to hear that cackle since, and I have not told a single person in the house about it. I'm working at a summer camp as one of the youth counselors, and at this summer camp was the grave of a baby girl who was the first person who was born and died in the county. I think she only lived for a couple days. Well anyway, there were 2 other youth staffers who started to make dead baby jokes at the grave. The rest of us were like, what the duck guys? Stop. I should mention that at this camp the staff slept in these bunkhouses on bunk beds. These are very sturdy/heavy and take a lot of effort to move. Well, these 2 guys were bunking together by the door. Later that evening, they decided they didn't want to sleep next to the door because light easily came through and asked other staff to trade. Another friend and I did, and that was that. That night at around 3 o'clock in the a.m., our bed, the one the 2 guys were originally sleeping in, started rocking back and forth uncontrollably, like it was at a 75-degree angle. In my exhausted state, I thought that there was too much weight on one side, not possible, and rolled over. It keeps happening, and my friend on the bottom bunk yells, "Parode whacker, get off." We jump off, and it shakes one last time and stops. We wake up the whole cabin freaking out, and someone else who could see our bed didn't see anyone moving it. We settle down and hop back in bed at around 4 o'clock. Maybe 15 minutes later, we are both still kind of awake, it starts happening again, so we said duck it, pulled the mattresses off, and slept on the floor for the next week. Been there several times since, and it never happened again. I was on a backpacking trip on the Appalachian Trail, and my dad and I stopped at one of the many public cabins. We set our bags down and joined the campfire. It was just us and a middle-aged Asian couple. We begin talking, and the sun sets, so we don't expect anyone else to come. Nevertheless, this huge guy with long silver hair sets his small pack down under the awning and joins us at the fire. He was no less than 6 feet 8 inches, extremely muscular, and had his hair tied back into a ponytail. Imagine a more muscular Geralt from The Witcher. We start talking, and he seems very friendly. Then, my dad asks the man, "So, where are you from?" No response. My dad repeats the question, thinking the guy didn't hear him. No response. The Asian guy asks the question, and suddenly, the big guy explodes, yelling, "I don't know. I don't freaking know." He, then, takes out a huge Bowie knife and a whetstone and starts sharpening it. All of us decide to pack our stuff and book it to the next cabin, which was about 7 miles away. It was a walk, but we eventually made it there, and there was a dirty hippie dude already there. He stunk like hell but was harmless. We stop at the campfire and hang out for a bit, then I see a reflection out of the corner of my eye. I turn around and see the big, silver-haired guy standing in the tree line, spying on us. At that moment, I nearly shat my pants because there was no way all of us could take this guy on. He was built like a WWE wrestler, and we were all under 6 feet. I let the other people know, and the Asian guy took out a revolver and told the man to go the duck off. The big guy stands there for a moment and silently walks off into the woods without making any sound. After that incident, we agreed to have someone keep watch. Since the Asian guy had a gun, he volunteered while we slept. In the morning, I was so glad the big guy didn't come back because an Asian man fell asleep. That shit still gives me chills. I was living in an apartment with 3 roommates at the time. I was working all sorts of weird hours and would stay up late most nights. Our apartment had 2 hallways that formed an L. My room was at the top of the L, and the bathroom was in the corner of where the lines meet, with the door being in the inside middle of the small section. In the outside corner was the living room. I walked out of my room to go to the bathroom. No need to turn the light on as this was a trek I had made hundreds of times before. As I left the bathroom, I turned to go back to my room. Just as I turned off the lights in the bathroom, standing where the short hallway and the living room met, there was a teenage girl standing there. Wearing a white flowery dress, just smiling. She didn't look evil, just a normal person standing there smiling at me. I freaked the duck out and went running for my room. About 20 minutes later, I finally came out of my room, turning all the lights on as I went through the apartment. She was nowhere to be seen. However, where I saw her standing was noticeably colder than the rest of the apartment should have been for an August evening. Creepy, but not the worst part. I lived there for about another year, and I never saw her again. After I had moved out, I was hanging out with my one roommate who had the bedroom at the end of the small hallway, right next to the bathroom. We were talking, and I told him that I never felt comfortable in the apartment after something happened. To which he responded, "Oh, you saw her too." I nearly drove off the road when I heard this. We then both described her, finishing off each other's sentences describing her. He had seen her twice. I was indifferent about ghosts before that. Now I believe in them, or believe in something. It was very creepy, and every time I tell the story, the hairs stand up on my arms. When I was a kid, the thing I hated to do the most was take my clothes down to the basement and place them in a big pile next to the laundry machine so that my mom would wash them. That side of the basement was not finished, and it freaking terrified me. I had so many nightmares about the place, like crazy reoccurring nightmares, that I would realize when they were happening, but I was unable to escape them. One of the nightmares involved me wandering around the house alone, only to realize that the time was drawing near. I don't know what time it was, but I could feel it in my bones that terrible things were about to happen. So I would get under the kitchen table, the door to the basement was in the kitchen, and then the basement door would open, and I could see the legs of some man. I never knew who it was and never saw his face, but I knew that if this creature caught me out in the open, it would do terrible things to me. The worst thing was the thought that it knew I was under the table, but it enjoyed the fact that I was so afraid, hiding under there, trying not to be seen or heard. Sometimes, either at the end of an unrelated dream or on its own, I'd be walking down the stairs into the basement, and when I stepped off the last step, I was plunged into total darkness, and something would grab me. I can't explain the terror this produced in me and the fact that I knew at the top of the stairs what was about to happen, and I could not stop walking. There were other crazy dreams like that, all taking place in the basement or about the basement. I hated the basement. One day when I had to take my laundry down, I was home alone except for my dog. So I decided it'll be better to have her down there with me than have to go by myself. I grab my laundry, call the dog, and head down the stairs. It's daylight, light is streaming down the stairs and into the basement through these small slit windows, and nothing is all that terrifying. I saunter over to the machine, casually toss my clothes onto the pile, and start to make my way back up the stairs. Despite my previous boldness, my aversion to the basement drives me to always run up the stairs. I was a scrawny kid, so you could barely hear my feet tapping up the stairs. Suddenly, all I can hear is this insane thudding and scrambling coming up the stairs behind me. My brain almost literally shut down. I screamed with terror, I felt my heart pounding in my chest, and I couldn't even continue moving up the stairs. I simply fell onto the stairs and curled up into a ball. Can you even imagine growing up and being told monsters aren't real, and then facing the moment where your worst nightmare is about to murder you in your own home? I just shut my eyes as tight as I could and waited to die. Then my dog started licking my face, excited to be playing a fun new game called Race You Up the Stairs. My parents' walk-in closet was creepy as duck, and we had a ghost child in the house. Here are some short summaries of experiences in that house. As a little kid, along with my childhood best friend, whenever we were in my parents' bathroom, they had a huge jacuzzi tub we'd play in. We would make sure that my parents closed their closet door first, and we would always run past the closet because we got the creepy feels, and as a kid, I believe we can really feel those things. Like I can't describe, but like nervous knots in your belly. My mom said once she was in her bedroom when she heard a jack-in-the-box go off in the closet, but we never owned a jack-in-the-box. My oldest brother had the biggest room, so there was enough room for a gamer chair in the bedroom, and one night he saw the chair spinning on its own. Also, there were multiple instances where he felt like there was a kid jumping on him in the night while he was sleeping. He was a bigger dude then. My dad, who is the businessman type and who is the doesn't duck around type, said one night while watching TV in the family room, which was next to the kitchen that he could see into that led into the dining room, he saw a little kid run by the frame with a blonde bowl cut. On another occasion, my mom was sitting in the family room facing the kitchen when she saw a small child standing behind the sink so she could only see the top of their head, and it was a blonde owl cut. My experience was at 7 years old, and this was terrifying. My bed faced my bookshelf, and on the top I had a baseball sitting on something to hold it, and it had been there for years. One night I woke up to the loudest thunk, and it happened 3x, and then I heard rolling, and I looked over, and that ducking baseball is right next to my bed, where my head is. Another time a few years later I was home alone in our foyer practicing a dance routine, where there was a bathroom to the right, and suddenly I heard a huge boom like a heavy-ass bowling ball was dropped. I remember specifically hearing the toilet seat make noise. It was so hard, I booked it and ran to my friend's house until my parents came home. I had friends over that experienced shit too, and this was at like 15 years old. I had a friend sleeping on the couch and said she heard people talking in our garage at an ungodly time of the night. My mom's friend claimed she heard the same but at a different time. We as a family got kind of used to it. We'd hear footsteps running upstairs or in the hallway and just be like, oh, there's the house ghost. My mom taught us to not be afraid, so I wasn't unless I was home alone. The older I got, the more chill it was for me. Once I got older, my parents left me a lot at home alone, and it'd get the weird spooky feeling but got kind of used to it. But that closet, that's a different story. I hated that closet. I grew up in a small town. My parents' house was about a mile outside town. At night during the summer, I would sneak out and walk into town to see my friends. There is a large golf course between the village and my parents' place and an old trail through the woods behind it, formerly where a railroad came into town years ago. I would walk that trail as a shortcut and to avoid getting hassled by the local police for being out so late. Bordering the golf course is a huge, abandoned Gothic architecture college that closed down in the 1970s. One night, I was walking home, and I kept hearing leaves crunching behind me on the trail. It's not unheard of, as there are wild animals and occasionally someone would camp out in the woods without permission. I picked up the pace a little and continued on my way. A few minutes later, the crunching became more consistent and closer. I got a little nervous and decided to cut away from the trail along the golf course and go along the old college. It's less known, and the trail is overgrown, so I figured it was unlikely someone would follow me down there. Everything seemed good. A little later I walked by an old, boarded up entrance to the college. I had been there plenty before, it never seemed spooky during the day. This time, all the boards had been broken off the doorway and were in pieces on the ground. If you look up Bennett College Abandoned on Google, you can see photos of this place. No way was I going inside. I cut back toward the golf course and started walking faster. A little while later, the noise started again, to my side in the woods. It was louder now and continuous. There was no break in the noise. No pause between footsteps. Just a continuous dragging noise. I started jogging across the golf course. When I got close to the road by my house, I heard a noise. It sounded like someone laughing quietly. I looked back toward the trail, and in the moonlight, I could see something standing there in the grass. I could only see its silhouette, but it was thin and tall. Too tall for any person. Its arms and legs were unusually long. Then it started moving toward me, and I turned around and ran home screaming. When it moved, I swear, its legs didn't bend at the knee like a person's would. I don't even know how to describe it. Later on, I would compare the shape to Jack the Pumpkin King or, more recently, the Slender Man. But this happened in the mid-90s, before such things. I know it doesn't sound scary or original, but I was there, so in my head I know it happened. And it still scares the shit out of me all these years later. That was the last time I ever walked that way. This is from when I was a little boy living with my grandma on our farm at the time. The farm had been around for a very long time, and we had lived on it for around 10 years. I was living with my grandma there, and we were the only two who lived in the house along with our 2 dogs and the cat. This house was huge. 6 bedrooms, 2 kitchens, 2 full bathrooms, a basement, and of course 3 living rooms. Now my grandmother would sleep on the first floor in her master bedroom, and I would sleep upstairs in the playroom, if you will. One night I was upstairs asleep with my dog Sam and our cat. Sometime in the night I woke up to the sound of someone walking up the stairs and thought it was my grandma coming up for some reason, so I just closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. We had wooden stairs, so the footsteps were rather loud, and I slept with the door open. I swear I heard these footsteps coming up the stairs for at least 10 minutes and started freaking out in my head and looked around the room and saw my dog passed out on the floor and my cat asleep at the end of the bed, both of them clearly not hearing what I was hearing. All of a sudden the footsteps stopped, and I was relieved but still had a pounding heart. A couple minutes later I heard a pair of footsteps coming up the stairs, 2 pairs of feet, and this time a little louder. I was really scared now, and I obeyed the law of if I am under my blanket and can't see it, it can't hurt me, so I shut my eyes harder than ever and just stayed very still. I was like this for what seemed like hours, but in reality it was probably only a couple minutes, and again the sound stopped for a brief moment. Now is when I should say that outside my door in the hallway was carpeted, and the next sound I heard is what freaked me out the most. I heard the sound of someone coming towards my door with a dragging foot. I think I only tolerated this for a few seconds before losing my calm. I called for my dog, who awoke and told him to follow me. With him at my side and holding his collar, I walked down to my grandma's room, turning on all the lights, and slept with her that night. I never heard anything again, but I did hear other ghostly stories from people who had stayed in the house over the years. This is the story I like to tell people who say they are afraid of the dark. I'm a trucker. I traveled many roads. Some 4-lane. Some 6-lane. But most are 2-lane. One night, around 10 p.m., I was traveling near a small town in Missouri, southeast of Kansas City. The road I can't recall because I've traveled so many and yet so few times. I do know that it was near I-44, as I was headed towards Springfield, Ohio. I came up on a stoplight and, as I was looking ahead, saw what looked to be a person standing roughly 1/4 mile up the road with that obvious "Can I catch a ride" hand sign. I figure, why not? So once the light turned green, I eased my rig up to speed enough to get to this person quickly, yet easily. I pulled off slightly with the now easily viewable young lady in view right in front of me. She grabbed a bag and jumped on the side steps of the passenger side of my truck and asked where I was going. I stated my destination, and she said, "Perfect. I'm actually headed to New York City to make it big." I invited her inside, and she opened the door and climbed in. After takeoff, she started talking about fame and fortune and making a name for herself in the Big Apple. She appeared to be late teens, early 20s, with clothing that stood out a bit. Her sweater was tied and hung around her waist, a short-sleeve V-neck shirt that gave credence to her bust, and cut-off shorts that stopped towards her upper mid-thigh. Now I had no intent on this woman, just making observations. It being 2014, I haven't seen this kind of dress since the early 2000s. After about 30 minutes of her jabbering on about what she wanted to become, I finally reached the interstate and made my turn to go eastward. After a few hours, I was coming up on being done for the night and planned to make my stop at a truck stop just outside St. Louis. A couple hours ago, she asked if she could get some sleep in the bunk of my truck. I said, "Sure, no problem. Everything's made, just lay down and catch you some Z's, and I'll wake you when I'm ready to stop for the night." Well, I started hollering to the bunk of my truck to let her know I'm fixing to stop for the night, and I got no response. I tried a couple more times, and to no avail. I figured the gal was probably zonked out hard, and I'd wake her when I stopped to fuel up my truck before parking to let her hike into the main store to find another ride or use the facilities or whatever. I pull in, set my brakes, unbuckle, and clamber into the back behind the curtains to find that she's gone. Not there. Her bag was gone, and the bed wasn't even messed up. Thinking maybe she climbed out the bunk side door without my knowing, I gave it a tug. Nope. Still shut and, still locked. Standing there, confused, I couldn't make out what had happened. The entire trip, I had been traveling anywhere from 40 to 70 miles per hour and never stopped until now after I picked her up. Safe to say I couldn't sleep that night, and, not only was I late for my delivery because I couldn't sleep, I could never bring myself to pick up another hitchhiker again. Back in 2008, I was 15, and I lived on a 300-acre ranch in a small town in Idaho. I lived in a 5-bedroom, 3-bath 1980s cheaply built home with my parents and sister. My 6 older brothers had already grown up and moved out. Yes, I know, big family. My sister and I slept in the bedrooms upstairs, just down the hall from my parents' room. Her room was directly across from mine. That year I started having nightmares about dark figures, and then I would wake up around the same time every night, 3 a.m. Well, one night I wake up, look out into the hallway, and a dark figure walks past my door. I blinked a few times, decided I was dreaming, and went back to sleep. The next day I moved my bed so when I woke up I wouldn't look out the door into the hallway, thus making it harder to imagine things walking by in the night. So 3 a.m. comes around again, and I wake up to a woman's voice singing this high-pitched eerie song right next to my ear. There was this dark, heavy feeling in the air, and I stopped breathing. The singing continued, and then, ever so softly, I felt someone or something playing with my hair. Softly running, its hands down my red hair. I closed my eyes and said a silent prayer because I was too terrified to speak a word out loud. As soon as I finished praying, the song stopped, and I heard a scream fade away. The next day I told my mom about the experience, and she dismissed it for a dream. I forced myself to believe her. It had to be a dream because if it was real, I would never be able to sleep again. Dream or not, I moved my bed back to where it had been the night before. 3 a.m. came around again, and suddenly I found myself awake, staring at the dark hallway between mine and my sister's rooms. That's when a dark, slender figure walked in between our rooms and stood in the hallway. It turned its head and looked into my sister's room and then into my room. Back into my sister's room and then turned to look back into my room again. My heart was pounding through my chest, and all I wanted to do was scream, but I couldn't. I was terrified that I froze. The figure paused and almost smiled. It wasn't a smile because I couldn't make out its face, but it was like it knew it had me. Then, just as I was gathering the courage to scream, the figure got down on its hands and knees and started crawling into my room. I screamed the most pathetic scream of my life and yelled, "There is something in my room." My parents flipped on the lights and came running into my room to find nothing. To this day, my parents say I was dreaming. I switched rooms after that, and even now I refuse to sleep in that room when I visit my folks. I don't know what I saw or what happened, all I know is that it did happen. My mother-in-law was a very funny and cool woman. She and my wife were really close, and sadly, she passed away when our son was about 4 months old. Flash forward a few years. We live in an old 1930s era craftsman house in Pasadena, California. Our son is about 3 at the time. I was giving him a bath one night, and he starts looking over my shoulder, not at random stuff, but at something. A moment passes, and he asks me why Grandma calls Mommy a strange name. Long pause. I asked him what he meant, thinking he was talking about my mom. He then asked, why does Grandma call Mom with that nickname? My mother-in-law's nickname for my wife. This truly shook me. My wife and I never used the nickname, it was just what her mom called her since she was a baby. I asked him where he heard that. His reply: the farmer told me. I asked him who the farmer was, and he replied, his friend. I tell my wife this story later, and she's of course reduced to tears over the whole nickname thing. We both know there is no way for him to know this, and we just kind of marvel at it. Flash forward to the next weekend, and my son is playing in his room. My wife is at work, retail, and I'm home, I worked MF. I hear him start talking like he's having a conversation. He's saying things like yes, no, I don't know that, and then some laughing. I go into his room and ask him what he's doing, and he says playing. I ask with whom? He says the farmer. At this point, I'm already thinking about the Ducking Exorcist movie and Captain Howdy. It's a little unsettling. I ask him where the farmer is. He says he left when I came in. The duck. So my wife gets home and I tell her this, and now she's just as weirded out as I am. We have no idea what to do and figure if it happens again we'll do something. A few days later, in the middle of the night, we both overhear our son saying the following: Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore. My wife and I go check on him. We're both feeling a little freaked out. He's just sitting up in bed. I ask if he's okay, and he says yes. Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore. He never once mentioned the farmer again. Not ever. He's 13 now and doesn't remember any of it. We do, though. Broke into an abandoned hospital in the middle of the city. There were about 10 of us. Anyways, we brought those little family band radios, and we split off into 2 groups, the first group exploring the bottom 5 floors, including the basement, and my group exploring from the top down, and we would meet wherever in the middle. The place is probably somewhere in the 2 million square foot range, and we wanted to cover it all as a group. So we go about our exploring and meet wherever on the 6th or 7th floor. We're all standing there next to the elevator shaft talking about stuff we've come across and are about to leave, when all of a sudden our radios start crackling. And not the losing signal type of crackling, like if you turn on an AM radio in a thunderstorm type of crackling. It goes on for about 2 or 3 minutes and then stops. So my friend Tanner looks at me, and I ask him what frequency he's on. Channel 4. I look at mine, and I'm on channel 2. I must have bumped it in my pocket or something. But that still doesn't explain why it was happening to both our radios. So he pipes up into his radio, hello? Nothing. He tries again. The crackling starts again, and you can vaguely and faintly, but clearly hear what sounds like one of those metal medical carts crashing and a girl screaming, no. No. Helps me. And a man goes, "We are trying to help you." Then it stops. So he tries one last time, and then it stops all of a sudden, and it sounds like someone has clicked on a mic on another radio. I still get nightmares about the next part. All of a sudden, silence, and then "I've found you" comes over the radio, and then across the room, the place is being actively demolished, so there are no walls except load bearing, the most blood-curdling scream I have ever heard, as well as the elevator, which the building has no power for whatsoever, starts dinging, and you hear the elevator go whizzing past and bottom out with a nice thud, which probably sounded like a bomb exploding. We got the duck out of there, and I refuse to even go within visual distance now. It turns out it used to be a federally run hospital that was notorious for human experimentation on TB patients, and there is a good chance that the girl heard was a girl who a lot of people have heard there. The story goes that she was a nervous wreck and she would chew her fingernails to the bone, so in an effort to stop her, they removed her fingernails. Keep in mind that this hospital hasn't been open for 20 years at least. My first girlfriend's house was probably haunted. It was a newer house built in the late 80s and early 90s that used to be woods in Connecticut. This happened in 2001. We were having an after-school snack in her kitchen when she told me she had previously seen an old man with a large white beard sitting in her living room. I laughed it off since the house was so new and the property firmly being woods meant it couldn't possibly be haunted. A few weeks later, similar situation with her in the kitchen and me returning from the bathroom. As I walk into the kitchen, I see a man in her dining room sitting at the head of the table. I don't see a beard, but it was an old man. Me trying to be as scientific about it. Deny what I saw since my GF gave me enough information, my mind could be playing tricks on me. Fast forward a few months. The whole thing is basically forgotten, and we didn't have any other encounters. She had a friend visiting from Brazil. Her friend was downstairs next to the living room while my GF and I were doing our thing upstairs. All of a sudden, her friend burst through the door crying. She asks in Portuguese what happened. She goes on to explain, "I was downstairs, tending to music with my headphones in, when I turned the corner to go into the living room, and I basically ran into this old man with a long white beard." I know my GF wouldn't have told her because we both didn't take it too seriously. I know I didn't say anything since her friend barely spoke English. To this day, I still want to ask the new owners of the house if they encountered the white-bearded man. When I was 18 years old, my oldest stepbrother and his wife invited my boyfriend and me to live in a house they were renting to own. This seemed like a great idea because I wanted desperately to get out of my parents' house and start my adult life. We moved into the house in December/January and gathered gas-powered heaters since we didn't have electricity for a while after moving in. The house had 2 stories, a living room, a kitchen, a dining room, mine and my boyfriend's bedroom, and a small bathroom on the first floor, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and what we dubbed the game room on the second floor. We had 3 cats in the house, and our friends would come over often. My stepbrother's friends would tell me that they would often hear a crying baby in the game room, although none of us had babies, so I always thought they were ducking with me. We also had some kind of constant dripping/trickling sound inside the walls. We had a plumber come check things out, and even though there were water spots on my bedroom ceiling, he said there was nothing wrong with our pipes or plumbing. One night, everything kind of came to a head. My boyfriend and I were sitting on the living room couch, in the empty house, around one of the heaters, waiting on a friend to pick us up for dinner. I was reading, and my boyfriend was sleeping. I didn't wake him or bother him because he had just finished a 12-hour shift and was clearly exhausted. While I read, I could hear stomping/running around upstairs but didn't think much of it because there were 3 cats, you know? Well, at some point, out of nowhere, my boyfriend woke up and jumped off the couch. He asked if I wanted to walk to the restaurant, which was about 3 miles away. I told him no, that it was freezing outside and our friend was on the way to get us. He just kept insisting we walk until I finally gave in and we walked out the front door. I asked him what the hell was going on, and he told me he'd tell me when we got out of view of the house. Obviously, I thought that was weird, but whatever, I guess. We finally got around the corner, and he stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. He asked if I talked to him or touched him while he was sleeping, and of course I said no. Then he went on to tell me how someone or something whispered his name in his ear and grabbed his shoulder while he was asleep. He asked again if I touched him, and I said I didn't. Then, he asked if I heard the stomping upstairs, and I told him it was the cats. He looked me in the eyes and said, my name. All of the cats were asleep downstairs in the living room when we left. I didn't step foot in that house again for 2 weeks after that, and it turns out my boyfriend had bruises on the shoulder that were grabbed. Later, we found out a whole family, baby included, had been murdered in that house. This is the one that scared me the most. I was living alone for the first time in my life in Florida, 3,000 kilometers away from my family. I was 19 and getting used to living alone. Coming from a large family, it took me some time to get used to not having anyone around. So at first, some of you guys might have experienced that. I felt looked upon or not alone, but I always put that on the fact that I had been used to living with 5 other people. So one day, I'm playing video games in my living room. I'm sitting on the couch, and from the corner of my left eye I can see the corridor between the bathroom, left, and the bedroom, right. I lived alone, so my bathroom door was often open just like my bedroom door. Anyway, I felt a tickling in my neck, and a few seconds later I felt something like fingers passing sideways on my hair. At the same time, my left eye detected movement in his corner, coming from the corridor, and I saw the end of a white, dirty wedding dress going into my bedroom. I swear my heart stopped. I rushed out of the apartment screaming for help like a crazy woman. My neighbor got the balls to check my bedroom, and of course nothing was there. It took me some time that night to fall asleep. About 10 years ago, at age 19, I was close friends with a girl who was as interested in the paranormal as I was. She bought an Ouija-type board called Psychic Circle. It had words, photos, symbols, and a book that told you how to interrupt it. We never had much luck with it. One night she took it over to her aunt's house, and they apparently had a really intense experience with it. Her aunt asked her to leave it for a few nights so she could use it on her own. My friend left it, and we made plans to visit her aunt that weekend so we could all play together. So that Friday night we head over in hopes of a good supernatural experience. As soon as I got in the car, I just had a feeling of dread. I've had a few brushes with paranormal stuff in the past, and the prospect wasn't frightening to me, but I just felt wrong about it. We get to her aunt's house, and her aunt pretty much seems to dislike me the second I walk in the door. The feeling of dread was even more intense once I got to the house. I just sort of brushed it off as paranoia and tried to be friendly. My friend's aunt takes the board out of the box, and it looks old as duck. It weathered like it had been left in the sun for a few years. The previously bright colors were faded and worn. My friend said, "What happened to the board?" And her aunt told her it had been sweating. So aunt puts it on the table, looking at me with the utmost suspicion. At this point I felt absolutely terrified, and my palms are clammy and shaky. I put them on the oracle, and her aunt says, "No." I take them off, and she says, "They don't like you. They don't want to answer your questions. I can just tell." We leave very shortly after that. My friend is upset. She says that whole episode was very out of character for her aunt. Her aunt refused to give the board back, and I wound up buying my own. No luck with that one, either. Took it as a sign and gave it to some other friends. I was with my boyfriend at the time. We were lying in my bed, and the lights were out. We weren't talking, just both thinking. All of a sudden he rolls over and hugs me really tightly. I, of course, hug him back. But then this feeling just hit me. If I wasn't already lying down, it would have knocked me over. It was a total feeling of dread and panic. I'll admit, I have had panic attacks in the past. But this was not the same. I hugged my boyfriend back as hard as I could. I never felt like this before. My boyfriend is one of those people who is always really warm, but even in his arms I felt ice cold. I could feel this evil, awful feeling, and it seemed like it was coming from the corner of my room. It was kind of like sensing your friend behind you when they aren't saying anything. I honestly believed there was a demon or something in my room. I got the courage to speak, and I said, "Jay, do you feel that?" And he said he did, the cold, evil feeling. This all happened in about 30 seconds to a minute. He decided to call his friend, who was studying to be a youth pastor. I got up and turned the lights on and came back to the bed. He called Matt and put him on speakerphone. Matt prayed for us, and we both closed our eyes and listened, praying in our heads. When the prayer was done, the room felt lighter, and it wasn't cold anymore. But after a little small talk afterwards, Matt asked, "Were you two talking while I was praying?" We were like, "Of course not. We were just listening." He said he heard, from the phone, a deep, gravelly voice telling him to stop. And he said he felt an awful, evil feeling overcome him while he was praying. Ducking freaked me out. My boyfriend drove home immediately afterwards because he was super freaked out. I was kind of mad he wouldn't stay with me because I was scared too. I went into my dad's room to tell him I thought there was a demon coming into my room. He was sleeping though and just muttered something about having a gun and he'd shoot it. "Thanks, Dad." So yes, I am convinced it was a demon. But it never came back, so why the duck did it come? That's the only problem I have with the whole thing. What was it trying to accomplish? I don't think I'll ever know. I have a few paranormal events that happened all throughout my life. Most of them are pretty tame. But there is one that got to me and still sticks with me today. About 4 years ago, I was ending my freshman year at college. I had lived in the dorms with a kick-ass roommate and pretty much had a great experience altogether. Toward the end of my last semester, something seemed different in my hall of the dorms. We were all still our lively selves, but just walking into the dorms would give you this massive feeling of dread. We all wrote it off as the stress of finals approaching, but it just felt off. Well, one night after studying, I decide to hit the shower so I can just wake up and make my way to class in a few hours. Before I keep going, I should go ahead and set the layout of our hall and the bathroom. Our hall was one of many halls on a single floor. Each hall had 4 rooms that accommodated 2 people each, or a single room for the RAs. The entrance to the halls was massive steel doors with a small window located at one end, and across from it was the bathroom. It seriously felt like a prison block rather than a living quarter for college students. As for the bathroom itself, when you walked in, you were immediately met with 2 sets of sinks, 2 sinks aside, on your left and right, with massive mirrors facing each other, and creating that infinite loop of mirrors. Then past that, you had your 2 urinals and a toilet stall on your left, and 2 showers on your right. When facing the left set of sinks, you can clearly see into the showers from the mirror if the door is open. And in the right set of sinks you can see the reflection of the shower. The door of the bathroom was identical to the entrance to the hall, a massive steel frame with a small window that didn't allow for much of a view, with good reason. The door was propped open with a giant wooden wedge that couldn't be moved unless you were really trying to close that door. So back to the story. I'm all alone in the bathroom, gearing up to go shower. I throw my change of clothes on the right side sink so that way I can reach around the stall and grab them. Once I set my stuff down, I happen to look up into the mirror, and I can see in the distance something almost shimmering inside the shower stall. As I look at it, I notice that it slowly gets closer, like it's jumping from the furthermost layer to the next layer closer. I'm kind of unsettled, but I don't think much of it other than me coming down off of a massive Red Bull, Adderall, and caffeine kick. But it starts transitioning faster. As it gets closer, I can start making out details, but nothing vivid or striking. It's just a dark mass that looks like it's covered in hair. At this point, I'm freaking out hardcore since this thing is getting closer in the mirror, and I'm pretty much frozen in this one spot. As it gets to the 4th layer, I get the closest look at this thing I'll ever get, and I regret every minute of it. It wasn't hair but some kind of long flowing veil. You could see through it partially, but from the torso down it was just solid black, and the face, I can't describe it. It was clearly human, but at the same time it was so far removed. There were eyes, they were black but definitely glowing somehow. I only saw this for maybe a second at the most, but it burned into my mind forever. Then the lights cut out and I hear the door slam. It's pitch black in the bathroom, so I can't see this thing anymore. I go to open the door, but it won't budge, and then this intense smell of blood hits me out of nowhere, and that's all I remember. I woke up later in the hospital, and from what my RA claims, he was on his way to go use the bathroom sometime after this happened, where he found me in the shower stall with my shirt covered in blood from a massive nosebleed. He tried asking me what happened, and according to him, all I could respond with was it saw me, and I started freaking out. So he calls an ambulance, and they get me to the hospital. All the while I'm apparently freaking out, so they sedate me to get me to calm down. I'm coming to around the time my parents show up, worried sick of course. I ask them what happened, and according to the doctors, they believe I had a seizure. However, they ran CAT scans soon after, and I was cooperative enough to do so and found no sign of any seizure occurring, not to mention epilepsy doesn't run in my family at all, and having taken Adderall countless times in the past, and since then, I've never had a similar side effect, neither hallucinations or potential seizures. To this day, I still can't bring myself to look into a mirror for more than a minute, and just being stuck in a room with one for an extended period will just cause me to break down. I've been to therapy going on 3 years because of this, and I've talked to countless religious leaders who, besides giving me the general well, you should turn to God in times like these talks, don't recognize that kind of pattern as anything demonic or evil. And the strangest thing is that before that incident there were no actual claims of activity in those dorms, and since I left there haven't been any either. It was just that one isolated incident. A friend and I went urban exploring in an old factory complex that was built, and eventually abandoned, during communism. The place really looked like something out of Stalker. Everything was rusty, the grass was pale and sickly, and most buildings had a communist star on them. We entered a few buildings and found them in the state they were left in. It was as if everybody just left in a hurry, leaving everything as it was. There were cups of long-gone coffee on tables, open books, and plastic bottles with liquid still in them. The fields between the factory buildings and worker cabins were spacious and populated by stray dogs. This was all a bit creepy, and we quite enjoyed the atmosphere. At one point we entered a warehouse-like building with big tables with circular saws and some kind of railing in it. As we approached one of those tables, we saw a lot of pigeon feathers scattered around. There were also old blood stains and some bird bones there. It looked like someone mutilated the animals and just left them to rot there. We were freaked out by this, but we continued exploring the place. Then we came to a building with all the doors locked and in good condition, and we just couldn't find a way in. We decided to look through all the windows to try and figure out what we could find in there. As I climbed to look through those windows, I saw a bunch of small coffins, most of them just big enough to fit a toddler. The part that really sent chills down my spine, however, is that they all looked new. The wood was still shiny and polished, and there was almost no dust on them. We were scared shitless at that point, and we ran away from there as fast as we could. I was young when that happened. I would like to explore that place again, but it's now a private property and has guards, with guard dogs, even. When I was about 8 or 9, my family lived in a house in a little hidden neighborhood on a cul-de-sac. It had a huge backyard, but there was a rusted out trailer, the flat kind you use to tow dirt bikes and whatnot, in one corner of the yard. That area of the yard always gave us creeps, so we never went over there, neither did our dog. My 2 younger sisters shared a room, but they would come sleep in my room every once in a while because they said there were weird lights in theirs. My parents passed it off as the street lights were bothering them. One night, I woke up to this weird feeling of anger. It was like when you're standing next to someone who is murderously pissed at you. There was a shape of a person standing in the doorway and a single red glowing light like the cherry of a cigarette. Both my parents smoke, so I thought it was one of them. I sat up and said, "Mom? Dad?" But there was no response, and then the figure and the red light were gone. I pulled the covers over my head as quickly as possible and made myself into a tight little ball. Then there was a tug at the blankets at the bottom of the bed. I pulled the blankets back, and there was another tug. I was terrified and unable to move, so I just held on to the blankets as hard as I could. The tugging stopped, but I was frozen with fear. Eventually, I fell asleep again. When I asked my parents about it in the morning, both of them said they were asleep the entire night, and it must have just been a nightmare. Fast forward some 20 years, I used to have nightmares about the house, but especially the corner of the garage turned den, which looked like a black hole in my dreams. It was a 1-story house, but I used to have dreams of running downstairs into the den, where I knew if I went close to the black hole that something evil would get me. I also had dreams about other houses in the neighborhood being evil, and if I went to them for help, I would die. My younger sister and I were talking about the house with our mom one night, and she described having almost the exact same nightmares, but we had never spoken about it before. In her dreams, she would run down the stairs into the kitchen, where the cupboards would be opening and closing by themselves. There would also be a man standing in the den near where I would see the black hole. Needless to say, all 3 of us were pretty creeped out. I've been by the house a few times and still get this eerie feeling when I come into the neighborhood. Maybe it was built on an Indian burial ground. Very creepy story here. The story haunted me throughout my teenage years. Okay, so I was about 11 or 12. My parents had just gotten separated and were filing a divorce. They sold our house, and my mother and I moved onto a farm a few miles up the road onto a random dirt road nobody knew existed. It was called Mitchell Road and was named after the late farmer who owned the land. To add perspective, the road is about a mile long, winding and uphill through dense NY forest. About a half-mile up the road is a pond, and then a very nice house with amazing bushes and a great yard. Another half-mile up the hill, there is a large horse farm with a barn and house to the right. To the left was our house, a restored barn attached to a huge yellow 2-family farmhouse with 2 families living in it. Along the little driveway is a large trailer to the right, just past the houses, and a place where cows used to be slaughtered. After that is another house with a family. Keep going, and there is a half-mile long driveway leading to our landlord's home, buried in dense wilderness. It was truly a scary place to live. Anyways, my bedroom was upstairs, and I had a window overlooking the road leading up to our house and all the fields below. There was a huge crucifix erected in the field, which we thought was kind of odd. It is normalish in our area, though. There are a lot of holy rollers in the tri-state area, and especially in my town. Well, one night, about a week after living there, I'm woken up by a pulsating glow in my bedroom. I thought the house was on fire, but I also saw the shadows of trees in my room, so I put 2 and 2 together and realized the light was behind the trees in our backyard. I go up to the window, and what I see is the creepiest ducking thing I've ever seen. The cross is fully lit, and it exposed the surrounding area with light. There were small fires around the cross, and outside of those fires, I saw things moving about. It took me a moment to focus on the shapes, but what I later made out to be people on horses with black robes and pointed hoods. I could see them now, as they were riding in the light of the fire. I don't know what happened next, because I apparently just blacked out and collapsed back into my bed, which was under the window. I was woken up in the morning for school by my mom and did not forget what I saw. I looked back out the window, and the cross was still there but was smoking. It was made out of metal, I think. It is white or silver with blue trim. You could see the smoke coming off the area still, as the fires had not yet burned out. After school that day, I observed the horse tracks in the ground and found several empty liquor bottles. It was all freaking weird. I told my mom, and we immediately pieced the duck out of that place. She put me in therapy for a few weeks just to make sure I was okay. I'll never forget what I saw. It was just all so ducked up. If any of you want to look up the address of this place to confirm everything, it is 131 Mitchell Road, Hoosick Falls, New York. You may be able to see the approximately 25-foot tall cross. It is behind the row of houses, next to the pond in the open field. There is also some creepy shit in the woods across from the house down the road from the others. It is some sort of greenhouse type structure with furniture and taxidermy wrapped in plastic. I went in one day adventuring around and was immediately met by a strange man I never saw before who didn't live up there. He was wearing clothes you would expect someone from the 40s to wear and looked about 100. He shouted, "Hey, kid. You're not supposed to be in here. It's posted property. Get the hell out, now." Scared the hell out of me, so I ran home and didn't tell anyone because my mom might get mad at me for causing mischief. This is only the second time I've actually revisited these experiences, as it was traumatizing to me. The first was in therapy. Recently, a young couple was in a fatal crash on the road. They crashed at around 5 a.m., it was confirmed, and nobody found them until a day later, and it was too late. They weren't from the area, and nobody knew who they were or why they were there. Their family didn't know why either. Really eerie shit has always gone down on that road, as far as I know. The older couple in the really nice house down the road worked in my school, and I once talked to the woman, school nurse, years later, when I was in high school, about how weird it was up there. She said, "Yeah, well, old man Mitchell was an occultist years ago and had a family of 25 including multiple wives, who would often perform sacrifices next to the cross and rituals every full moon. Most likely, the family still does this, and this is what I believe I witnessed." Okay. So this is about 10 years ago, and my sister and brother-in-law have just purchased their first house. It's a small house with one bedroom, living room, den, kitchen, and bathroom. Basically, 4 rooms and a toilet. They move in with their 2 dogs, Eddie and Oscar. The house is cute enough, and the previous owners left their sweet velvet curtains that totally blacked out the sunlight so my little sister and I would stay over. It was cool because we could sleep in really late. Fast forward a few months. My sister, let's call her Betty, and brother-in-law, Bill, are sleeping. Bill wakes up to the kitchen lights on and the faucet running. He doesn't think much of it and closes his eyes to go back to sleep. Bill then realizes that the water has been running for a long time and calls out to Betty to ask what she is doing. When Bill calls Betty's name, she wakes up in the bed next to him. No one was in the house, but that light was on and the water was running. More and more suspicious things happen at Betty and Bill's house, so Bill gets the brilliant idea to set up a voice recorder to see if he can catch this ghost, or whatever it is in action while they aren't home. I don't remember if it was the first day of recording or not, but Bill's idea worked. He had set up the recorder while they went to work. When Bill listened to the tape, this is what he heard: hours of normal noises, cars driving by, Eddie and Oscar wandering through the house, etc. Then the phone rings. It rings until the answering machine picks up, Bill and Betty's recording plays and cuts off. It beeps, allowing the caller to know when to start their message, then complete and total silence. No sounds, nothing, for about 10 minutes. All of a sudden, Eddie and Oscar start barking. Not a bark like, "Oh look, a cat outside," but a bark like someone is in my house that is an intruder and we are about to attack the living hell out of them. This serious, intense barking goes on for a while, then silence again. Bill was curious as to why they stopped barking like that, so he rewound the tape and listened a few more times. On the last listen, he turned the sound up. As soon as the dog stopped barking, a scruffy, deep man's voice said, "Edison, Oscar, shut up." Bill and Betty told me and my sister and our parents about this. Of course we didn't believe it. Then we listened to the tape. To this day, I have no idea what it was. But I heard it with my own ears. Bill and Betty moved out as soon after as they could. Still creeps me out. It was probably 3 in the morning. I hopped off my computer and was tucking in to go to sleep that night. I had laid down and everything. I'm half asleep before I hear a female voice from my living room. "We'll come back once he falls asleep. Then we'll do it." Or something like that. So I'm like, huh. And I turn over before I realize that there are no females in the house. Only me, my brother, and my father. My mother and sister happen to be staying at a house probably half an hour away. So me being the paranoid duck I am, I grab a giant-ass watermelon cutting knife and start to spring around the house shaking and freaking the hell out trying to figure out what was going on. I search the entire house and use a flashlight to check the yard before just retreating to my room and locking the door. I lay back down, and the toilet flushes. Both my brother and father are asleep. I jump back up and sprint out of my room before the bathroom door opens and stand there. Nothing. I open the door, and nobody. So I head back to my room, shaken as hell, and the toilet just starts losing its shit. Flushing over and over again. I sprint back out, and right as I get to the bathroom, it stops. I barricaded my door and just sat awake on my bed for hours that night. I couldn't sleep, and I was convinced I was either insane or about to die. At this point, I've just decided I was tired, sleep deprived, and hallucinated the voice. Then the pipes were being worked on up the street or something, because if that was a legit thing, I can't. Story number 2. This time, I'm home alone. The door is dead bolted, and I live on the second story of an apartment building. The front door is at the bottom of the stairs that are right when you walk in. I'm in the bath, and my family is out at the store. They had left maybe 10 minutes beforehand, and I was just sitting and enjoying a soothing ass bath. Then I hear footsteps coming down the hall, and I see a shadow in front of the bathroom door. The doorknob starts going insane. Like someone was trying to force their way inside the bathroom. So I yell, "What do you want, brother?" Assuming it was him. Then the doorknob stops, and I hear and see the shadow sprint away from the door and down the hallway. I don't hear the door or anything else after that. So a little bit later I hop out of the bath and head to my room to get dressed. The bathroom is connected to my room in the hallway. I'm dressed and watching videos when I hear the door open and the distinct sound of my family walking inside, arguing, so I come out of my room and ask what they came back to get earlier and who was the doorknob jangler. Everyone's confused, and they insist nobody was in the house, and it was still dead bolted when they got back. Then my sister pipes up. She informs me that someone has been banging on her door at night, and she assumed it was me and my brother trying to mess with her. It wasn't me, and my brother claimed it wasn't him. Spooky shit. I'm either insane or haunted. Either way, it's calmed down sorta. Back in 1980, I was a woman Marine, stationed in Camp Smith, Hawaii. The base is on the top of a mountain, and it's nicknamed Camp Cloud not only for the clouds that run through the base but for the creepy things that happen there. I was a chef working the midnight meal, a midnight meal for the overnight staff. Before midnight, the doors are locked, and the only person that can access them is the CO, commanding officer, who pops by every night to see if everything is okay. At the time, I'm 6 months pregnant. Often I would hear the voice of a man and woman talking in the distance. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but bits and pieces were clear. I would figure it was the CO with someone talking. As he is the only one with a key, I go out of the galley into the dining facility and no one is there. This happens every night. There is a long hallway at the end of the galley that leads into the basement. It's rarely used, and the one time I went down there to retrieve something, I got the creeps so bad I had to get upstairs ASAP. Often when I was in the galley, I would see something out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked in the direction of the basement door, nothing was there. This happened so much that one night I decided to continue looking out of the corner of my eye, never looking directly down the hallway, and I saw a black mass, lumbering out of the basement and heading in the direction of our loading dock. Now this is 1980 and Rosemary's Baby was a hot movie at the time, and I'm concerned that thing wants my baby, lol. When I leave for the night, I stop by the soda machine, which is right by the door I will be exiting, and grab a soda for the way home. As I'm at the soda machine, I hear a noise in the NCO lounge, a partitioned area within the dining facility that only NCOs are allowed to use. I hear the sound of someone getting up, the chair scraping against the floor, and the banging against the table as if someone were pushing the chair back where it belongs. Now, I'm pissed because no one is supposed to be in here at that time, about 2:30 a.m., and I nearly locked them in. I go over to the lounge to give them hell, and no one is there. This happens every single night. I finally tell my husband, who doesn't really believe me but comes with me one night just to shut me up. While I'm getting the meal ready, he keeps coming back to the galley, asking me who I'm talking to. I'm not talking to anyone, and I figure he's hearing the same male and female voices I heard. As we go to leave for the night, we stop by the soda machine and wait, nothing happens. We take one step toward the door, and bam, the noise within the NCO lounge occurs. It scared him so bad, he never let me work alone in there again, and considering he works during the day, that was a big lack of sleep for him. Ah, true love. The truth is whatever was in the NCO lounge didn't scare me, although lots of things on that base did. I got the feeling that it was a soldier, most likely an NCO, protecting me from whatever black mass was in the basement. Fast forward about 17 months, my son is born and is not spinning his head around. I am friends with a woman named Maureen who is the girlfriend of one of my coworkers, and she tells me that one day he decided to sneak off into one of the storage rooms for a nap and was awoken when he felt something crushing his chest. He thought someone had found him and was sitting on him as a joke, but when he opened his eyes, he saw a black mist over him. He got to the point where he couldn't breathe and thought he was going to die. Not knowing what else to do, he started reciting the Lord's Prayer, and it went away. This started a long conversation about all the things I had experienced, and it turned out she's psychic. In fact, she was the one who told me the reason I could see the mass out of the corner of my eye is that you can't see an apparition looking right at it. That's why many people see them in mirrors. So being a very religious girl, she decides she is going to cleanse the area, our own exorcist. She does her thing one night after the meal is over. For the next few weeks I see and hear nothing, then I am discharged back home in the States. I call a month later to see how she is. She's pregnant and very happy about it, and I find out that she was found hung in the basement of the women's barracks. She was such a strict Catholic, I know she would never have taken her own life. I'm so distraught I get the bright idea I will try to communicate with her to see what happened. I lie in my bed and ask her to come through. At that moment, my bedroom door slams shut so fast and hard I hear it cracking. I get up, and there is a vertical crack right down the door. Needless to say, I didn't try that again. It happened to my parents. After they got married, they bought the house my dad grew up in from his mother. It was old, and my dad reports having a lot of bizarre, unexplainable experiences while living there. One bedroom in particular used to give him a really uncomfortable feeling when he was in there, and he once felt someone tug on his shirt when he was the only one home. Things like that. Anyway, it had 2 stories, and the staircase went up about a dozen or so steps before you hit a small landing, and then continued up another 5 or so at a right angle, so you couldn't see directly upstairs. My mom always got home from work before my dad did, and she said she always felt incredibly uncomfortable when she was up there alone, so she'd only stay long enough to change out of her work clothes and then come back downstairs. If my dad worked late, she'd sleep on the couch until he got home. Their cat at the time often refused to go upstairs, too, and frequently sat at the bottom of the staircase and stared up at the landing like there was something there. The creepiest thing always happened in the middle of the night. My mom was a light sleeper, and she'd frequently wake up because she felt something tapping the mattress near her feet. My dad always brushed it off and said it was probably the cat, but my mom insisted it wasn't. One night she even made him go get the cat, bring her upstairs, and sit on the bed, and they both felt the tapping happen while my dad was holding the cat. They never really figured out what it was. My dad ended up telling his martial arts teacher, I'll call him Rick, about it and invited his family over for dinner one night. Rick was born in Indonesia and claims to have had many experiences with the paranormal while he was living there, as well as some clairvoyant abilities. He confirmed their suspicions by saying that, yes, something was in the house, but it wasn't malevolent and wasn't anything to worry about. They sit down, enjoy a nice dinner, have a drink in the living room while his kids play around the house, and then they go home. That's when my parents notice this weird noise coming from upstairs. It sounds familiar, but they can't immediately pin down what it is with a source. They decide to investigate together, and my mom picks up the cat, thinking that if something's up there, she'll sense it. When they reach the landing, the cat shrieks louder than they've ever heard her shriek before, wiggles free of my mom's grip, and disappears into the living room. My parents, freaked out beyond all reason at this point, stop dead in their tracks and debate on what to do next. Ultimately, they decide that it's their house, and if they want to continue living there, they have to man up. So they ascend the last few steps and follow the noise to their bedroom. I should probably mention that all the lights are off upstairs and it's dark outside, so they can't see much. Thinking they're going to see something terrible, my dad hesitantly reaches into the room and flicks on the light, and nothing, but they can still hear the noise. They notice it gets louder as they round the bed, and that's when they finally figure out what it is. Turns out Rick's kids had been playing upstairs and, at some point, had been ducking around with their clock radio. It was off station, and the volume was cranked up as loud as it would go, so all they were hearing was radio static. They said it was the scariest thing that ever happened in that house, even though it turned out to be nothing, And nothing weird ever happened again. My mom wasn't afraid to be upstairs alone anymore, and the tapping on the mattress stopped. They like to think Rick's reckless kids scared away whatever was in the house. When my brother and I were kids, Mom was an ER nurse and would work night shifts. We would have a sitter stay with us until we were old enough to stay alone. When I was around 10 years old, a 16-year-old girl would watch us. I think her mother made her do it as a way for her to make a little money. She was pretty angsty and would always complain about watching us and how annoying we were. One night she was on the computer chatting with her friends on MSN. I was eager to get into the computer and print off some coloring book pages, but she wasn't giving it up. I'm sure I had been annoying her for a while when she told me I could use it soon, as long as I sat quietly next to her and faced the screen. As watched, she typed to her friend about how annoying we were, how she wanted to beat us with an umbrella, and how she was going to make us shut up soon. As I read it, I got really scared. Something about the way she was writing it and the way she made sure I could read it while she typed really freaked me out. So, I did probably just what she wanted. I called her out on it. I started telling her, "You can't say things like that, I'm going to call my mom, and the police will come get you," etc. At this point, she screamed, "You little brat." She jumped up, and I bolted. As I ran, I screamed at my little brother to hide. I ran towards the bathroom, which was the only room in the house with a lock. My brother had already barricaded himself in there, so I couldn't get in. While I struggled with the door, the babysitter caught up to me in the hallway and I was cornered. With nowhere to go, all I could do was scream and cry as she grabbed me by the neck and held me up against the wall, choking me. It felt like she had me for an eternity but was probably only a couple of seconds before I saw her eyes change as she realized what she was doing and let go of me. She told me to go to my room and walked away. While all this was going on, my terrified brother had called my mom at work and told her what was happening. Since she couldn't leave work, she called a friend to come over. He drove the girl home and stayed with us for the rest of the night. We never had her as a babysitter again. This happened to me a couple of years back. It was a weekday, early morning, and I decided to sleep in. Had nothing to do, in particular, as classes were in the afternoon. I know my mom and sister head out from 6 before the sun rises. Still sleeping, I hear someone calling my name. I lightly open my eyes, to which I can see the sunlight gently beaming through my blinds. As I look around, still groggy, I see a shadowy figure with red eyes standing over my bed, calling my name. "Time to get up," I hear. Acclimating this with the fact that I'm still sleepy, the figure had the height and shape of my sister. The only obvious answer was that it was her. 5 more minutes, I replied in kind. I closed my eyes, watching as it watched me. A few moments later, I enter sleep paralysis, with the shadowy figure still lingering there. I can't see, as I keep my eyes closed, but I can feel its presence. Laying there, helpless, I tried calling out for my mother. However hard I tried, no sound would escape my lips. My heart began racing. The figure stood there silently, watching. Unable to more, nor speak, feeling the presence of some unknown besides me, the only option left I had was to pray. It's important to know that I was, and still am, a skeptic. However, growing up in a religious family, it was the only option I could think of. I prayed and was released from my sleep paralysis in a dead sweat. I went on to suffer from sleep paralysis for a couple days straight after the event, each time breaking out through sheer will after the first incident, as there was no longer a shadowy figure. Which is weird, because now I can think calmly during sleep paralysis and slowly wake my body up when my mind wakes up first, but God, is it still terrifying when it happens. Never recounted that event until now after reading through some of the comments, and I have to say my heart is absolutely pounding thinking about it again. I attribute the case to a terrible nightmare, of course. Something I rarely speak of, but which has dramatically changed the course of my life. It's hard to put into words, and the emotions are still intense, so my writing is rather clumsy for this post. I do apologize. I was 22 and in college. I'm 31 now. I still haven't fully recovered. November 23rd is the day it happened. I lived in the country. One side of the street had a small strip of houses with farmland behind. Houses are further apart than a typical street. Across the street was farmland, then wilderness all the way to the mountains. Pretty isolated. Unfamiliar neighbors. The backyard wasn't fully enclosed. The house had been expanded in years past, so what used to be the back patio had been turned into a greenhouse room, made entirely of windows. I lived alone. I had gotten home from a night out with friends in the nearest city, about 30 minutes by freeway. It was sometime after 2 a.m. I hadn't had anything to drink that night because I had been going kind of hard lately, college, and wanted to take it easy. I came inside. Greeted my cats. Nothing was out of the ordinary. I went into my bedroom and flopped down on the bed, which was nothing more than a mattress on the ground pushed up against a corner of the bedroom. Sophisticated college living, I know. At that time, I used to keep my bedroom door open. I'm lying on my back as I drift off to sleep. I wake. I immediately notice two things. The first is an ambient light, the way dawn looks through a window, but it was still dark in the room. Second, there's something very near me. I was on my back, in bed. This thing was situated near my waist, at the side of the bed. I couldn't tell if it was standing and was only 3 feet tall or was sitting. I really only remember the face. It was gray. Large black eyes, but not as large as they make them look in movies and media. Almond-shaped. Some sort of scales or pigmentation, which looked like very aggressively furrowed eyebrows. I felt from it an intense, hateful, malevolent sensation. It wanted to hurt me. I don't know how I knew that from the feeling it emanated, but I knew. I didn't have an emotional response at first. I was too shocked. Then, I managed to utter a combination of whoa and okay, which came out as hokey as I put my hands up defensively and moved my body away from it, slamming into the wall as I did so. I didn't have time to feel any panic or terror before a type of hand came up and hit me in the head. My vision was awash in a world of gray milkiness, with dark gray veins interspersed. I could move, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. It felt too real to be a hypnagogic hallucination, especially since it wasn't anything near what I was dreaming about upon waking. I don't have sleep apnea, so I wasn't experiencing loss of oxygen to my brain. Though I have entertained these as possible explanations, none suffice because the experience doesn't fully meet all of the criteria of any of the phenomena. The next thing I remember is trying to wake up but being extremely disoriented. Like when you've been under anesthesia and you're trying very hard to wake up, but you can't snap out of it. I'm panicking while trying to wake. I finally snap out of it. I immediately vomit and begin sobbing uncontrollably, but I'm too scared to close my eyes. There's blood from me rubbing them to keep them open, by the time I'm able to stop crying. It takes me an hour to build up the courage to get out of bed. I grab a bat and begin clearing each room, trying to avoid panicking. There's no one there. No signs of forced entry. My cats were terrified of me, until I sat down and put on a hat. I'm bald and have dark circles under my eyes, so if they saw this thing too, the similarity might have made them scared of me. The aftermath was, and is, the hardest part. For 5 days I couldn't return home. I stayed with other people, and my ex-girlfriend would feed the cats. I finally returned home, sitting in my car in my driveway for a couple of hours, my cats peeking through the curtain to meow at me. I kept a knife taped to my back, one in my pocket, a bat by my side, and a phone with a flashlight app always nearby. I rearranged all my furniture to see all doors and windows. I noise booby-trapped rooms. I would panic if I tried to sleep at night. I developed a caffeine addiction. For the rest of my time in college, including graduate programs, I lived on a night schedule. I did not sleep until the sun came out, never left the lights off, and did not go outside of my house after dark for 5 years. No exceptions. I would stay out after dark with friends or at school but wouldn't return home until sunup. I have been unable to close my eyes voluntarily for anything longer than a blink without fear setting in. I slowly was able to push myself, out of necessity for work, back to sleeping at night and maintaining a more healthy lifestyle. But I'm frequently late to work and most often exhausted throughout the day. To this day, I still have an incredible amount of fear about falling asleep at night. I still arrange furniture tactically. I still keep a weapon near me at all times. I was never able to return to the state of physical health and confidence I had before this event. I sought help and was referred to psychologists, despite me being one. I sought out people who claimed to have had similar experiences. They were mostly mentally unsound or selling something. You don't have to believe me. This story is out there. It feels intriguing to express it in a public forum. The summer between my freshman and sophomore years of high school, a friend of mine and his family moved in with his grandma. They were buying a house that ended up having to have some work done on it, so his grandma invited them to live with her while they waited for the house to get finished. She had a beautiful, big house, and it was just her and my friend's cousin that lived there, so there was plenty of room. My friend's cousin was 2 years older than me and was going into her senior year of high school. The house's living room had a vaulted ceiling with floor-to-ceiling windows on all sides. It looked amazing but gave you no real privacy. It wasn't a big deal though because the house sat about 500 feet off the road and had woods surrounding it on all sides. Shortly after my buddy and his family moved in, I went over on a Saturday to spend the night. My buddy's room was small, so we decided to sleep on the 2 couches in the living room. Just as we are getting ready to go to sleep about 1 a.m., we see someone walk past the window outside. We freak out. We get his dad, who shuts off the lights in the house. About 100 feet away in a tree line, you can see a small red light as two people pass a cigarette back and forth. They are just standing there watching the house. His dad calls the police, then opens the front door and yells, and the two guys take off. The police find nothing over there. The woods are full of little game trails, so there is no telling where the guys went. The interesting thing is that there are only 3 houses within about a mile of this house, and none of them have older kids. One has tiny children, and the other 2 have no kids. So we have no idea where the people came from. A few weeks later, another friend and I both spent the night there. The 3 of us walk into the living room at about 10 p.m. to watch a movie, and there is a guy standing looking in the window. We freak out, and he runs off. Again, we can see the lights of the cigarettes in the distance. Over the course of that summer, there were multiple encounters with the watchers. There were 3 places they would come and stand, and we never could forecast if they would come or where they would go. They would knock on the windows. Once they shook the front door so hard, it set off the burglar alarm. At times we would just see them in the tree line watching the house. Once they took lipstick and wrote hello on the window. During the day we combed the woods, trying to find them, but never could. We thought it was likely guys from our school trying to catch a glimpse of my buddy's cousin in her bikini or in her underwear because she was hot, but it would have been a hell of an effort just to maybe catch a glimpse. We never found out who it was. Eventually the house my buddy's family was buying was fixed, and they moved. Who the watchers were and what they wanted is still one of the great mysteries of my life. This is the late 80s/early 90s, I was around 6 to 7 years old. I am at home with my sister, who is 14 to 15 at the time. We grew up in a small Texas town, everyone knows everybody. We are home alone this particular night, and my folks let my sister babysit me frequently. We always got along due to our age gap. Anyway, it is about 8 p.m. in the winter, deserts get pretty damn cold, so it is dark, and we are in the common room since that is where the TV was. Watching 60 Minutes or 48 Hours or Hard Copy or some shit, those 1-hour news pieces on CBS that chronicle large crimes in depth, trafficking, murders, kidnappings, and the like. Basically, a gritty lifetime is special. This one was a typical story. A guy next door who was quiet went on a rampage in his next door neighbor's house, mutilating them and kidnapping their young daughter. Well, the thing about our house common room is the door leading to the backyard was a large glass door on a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. Nothing but blackness beyond it unless you have the backlight on. We did not. The front door is on the other side of the room with a small entryway. This is a solid door, so you cannot see what is beyond it, with a glass storm door on the outside of it. About 45 minutes into the show, they are talking about the ongoing manhunt for this crazy guy, and bam bam bam, front door bangs like crazy. We jump the duck up and scream like banshees. Dead silence, now. The only lights on in the house are the kitchen down the hall from the common room we were in and the light from the TV. We start thinking something on the porch. We had some planters and a rocking chair out there, had simply blown against the door. This was West Texas, crazy strong winds out that way. Well, a minute or 2 of silence and us holding each other post-adrenaline overdose passes. Just when we are about to declare everything is safe, we hear the storm door on the outside of our front door close. Duck. Someone had to have opened that door to be able to bang on the front door like that. Shit. We are both frozen in the middle of the room on the floor where we had been watching TV. My sister crawls over to the TV and turns it off. It was an old TV, so you had to turn that metal dial to switch it off, which it does with a mildly loud noise. Now it is just us in a room dimly lit by the kitchen light down the hall. I do not remember how much time passed with my frozen and my sister still crouched by the now off TV, but we kept making eye contact then looking at the front door. I remember this part vividly. I am on my knees, sitting on my feet, and I turn around to look at the back wall of windows and glass door. We hear and I see the back door knob turn. It was locked on the knob but not deadbolted. It rattles slightly as if someone is gently trying the handle. Neither of us made a sound, we just held breath. Then bam 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 bam, loud as all hell, someone is trying to force the door open, just jerking it back and forth. The whole wall of windows is vibrating violently, and I can see with each jerk of the door how my slight reflection gets fuzzy, then clear, then fuzzy. My sister flips her shit and screams bloody murder. I am still frozen on the floor. She gets up and basically drags me into her bedroom, slams the door, throws her mattress and anything she can in front of her door. Thankfully she had remembered the phone, one of those ungodly heavy beige plastic long metal antenna portable phones. We still had to direct dial the sheriff there, and in her panic, She didn't remember the number. She just hit redial on the phone. It was one of her friends, and she tells them in broken gasps that someone is trying to get into our house and needs to get their right ducking now. The profanity sticks out here more than anything else. Who knows, young brain? I am curled up on the floor and cannot stop shaking. We don't hear anything else until we see the headlights of my sister's friend and her parents driving up to the house. We never did find out who was at the door or why. There were no signs of anything happening but a couple of scuff marks on the bottom of the back door that we could not remember if they were there beforehand or not. Nothing like that has happened to me or her since, but for damn sure we never forget to lock a door after that. A terrifying, but true story I experienced when I was 12. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area except for the family my dad was friends with. Single mom with 3 kids. Luckily there was a girl a couple years older than me, 12 at the time I met her, and we got to know each other a little over a couple years. We weren't close, but ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work. Which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother has been helping this one lady, through her work, and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom. She knocks a certain way when coming in, and answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. Wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in, and this is where I don't know details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbors to call the police. The lady brutally ended my friend a week from Christmas. Ended her in a bathtub. Hit her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. Back in November 2008, me and a few friends, we'll call them Nick, Anthony, Dave, and Cal, decided to drive to an abandoned chemical factory that was out in the middle of the woods, far from civilization that Dave knew about. We arrived at the abandoned chemical factory and parked a short distance down the road. Our intention was to find a suitable location to set up camp for the upcoming hunting season, which was about a week away. Although I don't hunt, this was a valid reason. Anyway, this place wasn't just one building, it was a complex. The first building we explored didn't have much in it, save for a few desks and beat-up phones. We walked out the back door and continued. We found the building where they actually made these mystery chemicals. There were conveyor belts, hooks, tables. It just looked like some kind of processing room. It was pitch dark, so we had flashlights. In the back corner, we saw the outline of a figure against the white wall. It looked human, so in a sudden panic, I shined my light on it. It was a graphic picture of Jesus with his hands together praying. It looked like it was drawn with a pencil. What was creepy about it was the fact that Jesus didn't have eyes. In the setting we were in, it was pretty unsettling. Anyway, we took pictures and moved on. Discovered a shed that honestly would not look out of place in a horror movie. Door kicked in, place was trashed, and exterior was overgrown with weeds and vines. I was half expecting Jason Voorhees to bust through and cut us up. On the inside, the floor was half torn up. The weird part about this shed was an entryway from one room to the next. It looked like some kind of sanitation area. It had a shower head in front of the door, like it sprayed some kind of sanitizing liquid, like in the movies or something. After this, we found another building. This one was huge. It was more like an airplane hangar. Inside, there were sealed metal barrels. I saw a road sign. It was rectangular and lying on its side, so it was almost my height. I totally took that shit. We kept moving. We found a field where there were rocks everywhere. I thought, this is either a minefield, or there was a battle here or something. Across the way, there was another small building. We walked inside and saw more desks and more phones. The only thing different was there was a ladder leading to an attic. What was odd was the ladder was already set up before we got there. I wasn't brave enough to go up there, but Dave, Nick, and Cal were. They went up for about 10 minutes and came back down. Dave had a box of files that he wanted to go through. What we saw blew my mind. The first was a map of the area we were in. The complex either used to be bigger than it is now or was bigger than we thought presently, and we only explored an eighth of it so far. Then we found reports on experiments with chemical grenades. After seeing that, we all wanted to leave. We didn't want to be caught there looking at this kind of stuff. We backtracked to the entrance and saw a black car with tinted windows, no plates, and no markings of any kind pass us, stop, back up, slowly roll forward, and be out of view. We heard it speed up. Dave, Cal and Nick ran to the car while me and Anthony waited with the sign. While they were gone, we saw the same car pass us again. We dove behind or underneath the tall grass. Then we saw Dave's Jeep speeding backwards into the entrance. Anthony ran to the door, got inside the Jeep, and sat in the middle back seat. I opened the cargo door and tried throwing the sign in. It slid back out, and I kept trying to push it in, but it kept hitting Anthony's head. He yelled, "Hurry up, it's coming back." So he ducked, I said duck it, left the sign, and ran around to the door. Got in the Jeep, and we peeled out of there. We had no idea who it was in that car or what they were doing, taking pictures, taking notes, whatever. We weren't doing anything wrong, never saw any signs saying no trespassing, never heard from any authorities. I have no idea what that was about, but it put a good scare in all of us. Way back when my husband and I first got married, we lived in a super upstate NY Army town. The first 6 months of marriage were in an even smaller town hour from the post. Family was 3 miles away. So he has 24-hour duty one night, he leaves, and I lock up the house and just settle in. I was still a more panicky person with being left home alone overnight. So when I triple-checked the front door screen lock, deadbolt, and garage door deadbolt, I locked the mudroom and went on with my night. About 2 hours later, I'm on the phone with my mom when I hear someone drive up. I figured they were pulling into another driveway and didn't think much of it. Until I hear my screen door unlock, my door unlock and open, and then the handle on the mudroom door starts turning. I guess I didn't tell my mom he was on 24-hour duty, but I heard this all going on and checked my phone to see if he had texted that he was coming home, which he hadn't. So I say, "Hey, I think husband is home, I'm going to go open the door, I'll call you back," and I had my hand on the lock on the mudroom door when I paused and thought, that's weird, he would have called, and right about then I hear the back door handle start turning. I guess I said what the duck pretty loudly, and they stopped and left. I guess. But I still stupidly opened the mudroom door to take a peek, garage door wide open, front door is closed and locked, screen door is mostly closed, but the spring didn't get the latch to catch. So I lock everything up and call my mom back. The next day when my husband came home, he had to call me to let him in because everything was locked up. I apparently never told him this, because when I mentioned it a few months ago, 6 years too late, he was pretty freaked out. Then, same place a few months later, and we go to bed and lock everything up, he jumps out of bed in the middle of the night, spooked because he heard a sound. We look out our window and send him to see or hear anything. He rushes downstairs and checks all the locks, and nothing is unlocked. Comes back to bed and convinces himself it was our drunk asshole neighbor. Next morning he can't find his keys or his wallet. I know he brought his wallet in because he left it on the kitchen table. I didn't remember seeing his keys. We decide I'll just drive him to post because he was going to be later and I'd search for both later. Go out to his car and its wife, open the doors, and everything. His wallet is sitting in his front seat, nothing taken. But his car has been torn apart, and his old iPod and aux cord are missing. I open his passenger door just to look, and his keys are sitting on the ground slightly under the car, like someone dropped them. That's when we notice on his keyring is the extra copy to my car, which specifically was kept in the house on the keyring near where he left his wallet. My husband is notorious for losing keys. He didn't want the spare key to my more expensive and newer car on his keyring, so we kept it on the key hook. My car was unlocked, nothing was taken except the medallion I kept on my rearview mirror. Turns out, 2 miles behind the tree line wrapping around our apartment complex was a blocked driving path that led to the state prison. I bought a toy box for my toddler's room at a yard sale. Almost immediately after we brought it home, he would wake me up hysterical and upset at night. He could barely talk, but he kept saying that the giraffe was watching him and was trying to explain that when the giraffe moved, it was loud and would wake him up. He was inconsolable. After a couple weeks of battling him about his new box, we shoved it in the garage and forgot about it. Flash forward almost 5 years later, and my sister grabbed the toy box from our garage, among other toddler supplies we weren't using, and started using it for my niece. Not even a few days later, my sister calls me to say she's bringing it back because my niece screams at night that the giraffe's head spins around and she's tired of the endless, sleepless nights of a freaked out kid. I have never felt so ill before when I remembered what my son used to say about it, too. When I was about 18, my dad came to my apartment to pick me up and drive me home for Christmas at my parents' house, about 1 hour away from the town I lived in. We drive for about 30 minutes, and then the car in front of us hits a deer. The animal went over the vehicle in front of us and landed on the side of the road. The driver who hit the deer didn't stop, and since the deer was still alive but badly hurt, we decided to not just phone it in but stop to put out a warning triangle and such to warn other drivers. The deer was bleeding from the mouth and had broken its 2 front legs. It was screaming and trying to get up, which only resulted in more pain. My dad called the police, and they told us to stay put until the hunter in the town who was on call came to take care of it. My dad's a hunter as well, and I'm kind of born and raised with everything that comes with being the daughter of a hunter, including being around dead animals and such. Still, everyone who knows the sound deers make, especially when screaming, knows how ducking horrible it is to hear. I was crying and felt such horror for this animal's suffering. A few minutes went by, and then a car pulled up behind ours. This road is usually kind of crowded, but at this point, just before Christmas Eve, it was obvious that most people were already at home with their families, and I think that in the entire time we stood there, maybe only 2 other cars passed us. A man gets out of the vehicle and looks at the deer. He's dressed in jeans and a jacket, not the typical hunting gear. I remember thinking about how this will ruin his clothes and feel sorry for him having to get out to do this on Christmas. He walks to the trunk of his car and opens it, retrieving a knife. The knife was not your usual hunting knife but more resembles some kind of machete. I look at my dad, who's stone-faced but holding my hand, his grip tightening more and more. I felt something was off and looked back at the man with the knife. The man's face tells me nothing, it's just plain as if he has no worries or thoughts at all about any of this, and it's chilling to the bone to witness him approach the deer. He puts his arm around the animal's throat, with its back to his stomach, so he's behind it with the knife in his free hand and the other holding the deer in place. With the deer still screaming, he ends it repeatedly in the chest, 5 or 6 times. Then he cleans the knife off his jeans and grabs the deer, which is still alive, making gurgling noises, and drags it down in the ditch. He just throws it down and walks past us, gets in his car, and takes off without another word. My dad is stressed out and shoves me into our car and orders me to get in, and I do. I'm in some kind of shock and stopped crying minutes ago. My dad gets in the car and is mumbling, "What the actual duck?" and keeps looking out the windows of the car as if he's worried. Then another car pulls up behind us, and my dad gets out again. This time it's a man in hunting gear, and I can't hear their conversation, but my dad later tells me it was the hunter, asking about the wounded animal. My dad explains to the hunter what has happened, and the hunter walks over to the ditch. He makes a distorted face when he finds the deer still alive and totally wrecked. Then he shoots it and walks over to my dad again and tells us it's over and we can leave. That man gave me trouble sleeping for some time after that incident. My dad and I talked about it later, and he admitted how scared he was when he quite early on figured the man was in no way a hunter, and when he pulled out that knife.